The river was shallow where they met. Men had already died there. Horses, too. Armor dragged bodies down into the current while arrows hissed across the water. Somewhere behind the lines, banners were collapsing into the mud. Someone was shouting for a charge, someone else was already running. And in the middle of that chaos, two riders found each other. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen rode with a calm people would later describe as regal, though on a battlefield, calm can look a great deal like resignation. Rubies were set into the breastplate of his armor. They caught the light of the afternoon sun each time he moved. Robert Baratheon rode toward him like a storm given muscle and bone. The hammer he carried was enormous, a brutal thing, made for breaking armor rather than elegance. When he swung with the confidence of a man who believed the world had been arranged for that exact moment. They met in the shallows of the Trident. The hammer came down. Steel burst. Rhaegar fell backward into the river. The rubies scattered across the river like drops of blood turning to glass. Songs remember this as the moment Robert Baratheon won the Seven Kingdoms. But songs are interested in victories. Lives are not always so tidy. Years later, the man sitting on the Iron Throne bears only a passing resemblance to the warrior who rode into that water, into that river. He is already growing heavy. The armor that once fit him is remembered fondly, but worn no more. The court waits for decisions that arrive slowly, if at all. Feasts seem to interest him more than councils. The hunting grounds outside the capital see him more often than the throne room does. But it isn't only indulgence that marks the change. It's memory. Robert talks about the rebellion the way old soldiers sometimes talk about campaigns that have long since ended, with a strange mixture of pride and hunger. The names come easily: the Trident, the Eyrie, the storming of castles whose walls no longer matter. The war appears again and again in his stories, not merely as history, but as a place he continues to inhabit. It has the quality of a remembered season, a summer that never quite ended. Sometimes, the moment that defines a man arrives before he understands what it means. On the Trident, Robert Baratheon was everything the songs would later claim he was: young, fearless, certain that the strength in his arms could bend the course of kingdoms. Men followed him not out of obligation, but out of belief. Belief in the war, belief in the cause, belief in the enormous warrior whose laughter could be heard above the din of a battlefield. There is a terrible completeness to such moments. A man collides with history, and for an instant, the two fit together perfectly. Afterwards, the fit loosens. The ground did not give Robert another battlefield, it gave him a chair. And chairs are patient things. They wait while disputes over grain shipments are argued across long tables. They wait while minor lords complain about taxes or marriages or lands that have always been disputed and always will be. They wait while letters arrive from distant corners of the realm carrying problems too small for a war, but too persistent to ignore. The work of ruling has its own kind of endurance, but it is a quieter endurance than the kind Robert knew. A battlefield announces the day's purpose immediately. The enemy is wearing the dragon right toward him. The throne offers no such clarity. Morning arrives with parchment instead of banners. Kingdoms are full of kings who would rather be somewhere else. So Robert does what many men do when the present refuses to resemble the past that shaped them. He goes hunting. The woods are closer to war than the throne room is. There is movement there, blood, the satisfaction of strength meeting resistance. But the woods cannot truly return him to the river. Legends look like monuments from a distance. Up close, they behave more like cages. At the Trident, Robert Baratheon became something the realm would remember forever. The warrior who ended a dynasty with a single blow. The story hardened around that image. And once a man becomes an image, living inside it grows difficult. There are only so many times you can be the hero of a battlefield. Time keeps moving, bodies change, kingdoms settle into routines. The war that once gave a man direction dissolves into feasts and councils and quiet afternoons where nothing needs to be smashed with a hammer. Yet, Robert's mind seems to circle back again and again to that river, as though some part of him never quite rode away from it. Lyanna Stark appears in these memories often. She's spoken of with a kind of stubborn reverence. Even decades later, her name carries the weight of unfinished business. At first glance, it looks like romantic grief, the betrothed bride stolen away by a prince, the woman whose loss ignited a rebellion. But the way Robert speaks of Lyanna has an odd quality to it. He rarely remembers particular moments with her, not conversations, not small details of daily life. Instead, she appears in his stories the way people sometimes recall a season rather than a person. Lyanna belongs to the same landscape as the rebellion, the same sunlight, the same sense that the world was still young and wide and waiting to be conquered. When Robert speaks of her, it often sounds less like mourning a woman and more like mourning the life that existed before everything hardened into duty and disappointment. Men sometimes remember their youth this way, not accurately, but beautifully. And so the Trident remains, a river where a young warrior once rode into that water and struck a prince from his horse. The rubies scattered, the dragon fell, the war turned. The chronicles say that was the day Robert Baratheon began his reign. But beginnings and endings are often disguised as each other. It may be that the greatest day of Robert's life arrived all at once on that riverbank, so complete, so bright, that everything afterward could only feel dimmer by comparison. Years later, when the boar's tusk finally finds him during a hunt, the realm will say its king died there in the woods. Yet, part of Robert Baratheon had been standing in the Trident for a very long time, hammer in hand, water around his boots, watching the rubies drift downstream. It is often that stories hide their most interesting ideas in strange places. Not in the speeches, not in the battles, but in the quiet spaces around them. The moments a character cannot escape, the memories they keep returning to, the things a story shows us without ever quite explaining. That's what this channel is about, looking at stories the way you might look at a painting, standing a little longer than usual, noticing the details at the edges, the small tensions that change how the whole picture feels. Sometimes that may mean mythology, sometimes novels, sometimes films, anime, or even history. But the question will usually be the same. What idea gave birth to this story in the first place? And what happens if we read between the lines? If that sounds like the kind of thing you'd enjoy thinking about, you can subscribe. There are many more stories worth looking at this way. And sometimes, if you look carefully enough, the story changes. Thank you.